And let me just bring our guest on stage. Bingo.
Hello.
Hello, hello, guests, aka Miss Tammy, or Mrs. Pardon me, Tammy Everts. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I just realized I'm 007 in your guest list.
You are. I hope nothing crazy happens, like someone kicks down the door and comes to grab you. I don't know. I,
Yeah,
I, I
well,
don't know.
you'll capture it all alive, so very
Imagine
exciting.
that. Then I'll have people knocking on my door after that. How are you doing?
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm great, actually. I'm a little calm now. As I mentioned earlier, it was like a messy morning. But a couple of things. I'm super happy to have another Canadian on. This is like 2 in 3 weeks, I guess. So that's or in 3 episodes at the very least. So that's pretty awesome. And again, I mentioned earlier, but you're someone I've actually followed for quite some time. Full, like major revelation here and disclosure. When I was interested in performance and just kind of poking around, some of your content was the first, if not the first, that I come across. I very much remember that. So this is
Nice to
kind of like
hear. Thank you.
awesome. Yeah, it's like honestly, and we can get into that in a hot minute. So how about we do this? As I like to say, it's kind of a sort of like a racing theme here, obviously, but I like to hand over the keys and pass the steering wheel to you. And let's start with this. Introduce yourself and where you work and who you are, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'm Tammy Everts. I am the Chief Experience Officer at SpeedCurve, which is we do front end synthetic and real user monitoring for a lot of big companies, probably companies that most people have heard of. And I wear a lot of hats because we're a small team, but kind of the main things that I do are using our own tools to do research. And our tools kind of let us dive into kind of the intersection of page speed, usability, user experience, actually like seeing correlations between page speed and usability metrics and user experience, and then ultimately to business outcomes. So you can actually see, if you make a page faster, what impact does it have on your business in terms of conversion rate or bounce rate or things like that. So I've been with SpeedCurve for about 8 years. And before that, I worked for a few other companies. I've been in the industry, the performance industry for about 16 years now. And before that, I did other web related things, but my background is not, I'm not a developer and engineer, as you know, Henri. I am a user experience and usability person. And because I'm Gen X, I have no formal training whatsoever, just wing it from the 90s and the early days of the internet, kind of setting up usability labs and watching people use the web and sort of see, what it actually looks like for folks. So that's kind of my passion, is just understanding how people use the web and technology and what it does for us that's good, what it does to us that's not so good, that kind of thing.
I mean, there's so much I'd love to add there. He's saying what it does to us that's not so good. You have a couple boys, if I'm not mistaken. Do you ever keep an eye on them and how they're using their devices and take notes while they're not looking?
So it's funny. So my boys are now 17 and 20, so, they don't really, like, love me saying, like, "Hey, you've had a lot of screen time today," to them anymore. As a side note, interestingly, my 20-year-old is at university, and he's doing a combined major in, computer science and psychology. So I kind of joke like he's actually getting the formal training that I probably should have. So someday I'll, in the not too distant future, I'll be learning from him. And interestingly, this same 20-year-old has made the comment that back in the day, we probably let them use technology too much, and we should have had stricter screen time limits. And he's totally not remembering all the times that my head exploded because I was trying to get them to get off their devices, and they wouldn't. So
That's
it's
amazing.
things are funny.
Full circle right there.
Yep.
I just have to add that because I'm like, oh my God, she had kids. So that must have been a very interesting, household as you kind of like peered over and watched them use their devices. But that aside, also, you'd mentioned your employee number one at SpeedCurve.
Yeah. So, I don't know, I know you have a lot of viewers, probably a pretty diverse audience in terms of background. So people may already have heard of Steve Souders and Mark Zeman. But Mark Zeman founded SpeedCurve 12, 13 years ago, and Steve was joined him shortly afterwards. And Steve is kind of like the godfather of web performance. He wrote the seminal book, High Performing Websites, like back in 2006, I think it
Mhm.
came out. And then he wrote the follow up like a few years later. And he was the chair, kind of the guiding light behind Velocity Conference, the O'Reilly Velocity Conference for many, many years back in the day. And he's kind of been that beacon of performance for a lot of us. And Mark has done some really interesting things as well. He kind of started off working more on the agency side and kind of had this vision for making performance metrics and data more accessible to a broader community outside of engineering and dev. So he basically built SpeedCurve to do that. So when they invited me to be their first employee, I'd known them for years beforehand. You don't say no to an opportunity like that. It's been really, really great. And yeah, I love being at SpeedCurve.
Yeah, I feel like I remember the announcement. And how old is SpeedCurve right now? I think you'd be true.
I wanna say coming up on 13 years, but I'm kind of at that phase in my life where time just, like, goes like that. So, it could be 13 plus or minus 1, let's just say that.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that long. Very quickly, and in one or two sentences, and I would imagine some of the viewers probably know what speed curve is. A quick like elevator pitch for those who may not know what speed curve is all about.
Basically, it's probably easier to just talk about, like, what the tools are in general, kind of industry-wide. So, there's synthetic monitoring, which lets it's also known as lab testing, where people can plug in any URL, their own pages, a competitor's pages, what have you, and, a bunch of kind of contextual parameters like browser type or geolocation, things like that, and it'll kind of like spit out a lot of like in-page diagnostics that are telling you like how your page is rendering, what some issues on the page might be. It'll show you some visuals, like these really great like film strip visuals, so you can actually see frame by frame what the page looks like as it renders. So it's almost like you're seeing the page in slow motion. So it's a really great diagnostic tool for kind of drilling down and seeing how your pages are built and what could be better. And then there's real user monitoring, which is also known as field testing or field monitoring. And that's where you're actually just like monitoring all of the user experiences, like all of your users coming to your site and capturing data about how they move around your site. So, a simple way of thinking about it is synthetic monitoring or synthetic testing lets you understand your pages better, and real user monitoring lets you understand your users better. And so you can
Mm.
take what you know about your users and where they're coming from and what pages they're visiting to build really good synthetic tests so that you can then do the diagnostic piece. And then in the real world, you can also see when there are anomalies, like for example, you're getting a lot of users who are suffering from really slow page load times, and you can get alerted on that in almost real time, and then quickly drill down into your synthetic data so that you can find and fix the problems. So, just that's
Absolutely.
what Speaker does. And we also do a lot of hands-on coaching and consulting for our customers as well. So that's a really fun part of what I get to do because I actually get to talk to customers and work with them and understand what their problems are.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's awesome. Now, here's another part that I love to ask some of my guests in the space is, pardon me, let me rewind that. Their first recollection of getting into performance. What was that one moment where you determined, hey, I'm going to follow this sort of space on the web, which is more or less web performance?
Yeah, so like again, because I'm not a developer or an engineer, I wasn't involved in this world until about 16 years ago when I was kind of approached from a company called Strange Loop, which has been acquired since, but the technology was basically automated front end optimization. So, kind of another way of putting it was we used to call it Steve Souders in a box. So, taking all of Steve's golden rules for what to do to make your pages faster, like compression and minification and all those various rules that he wrote about in his books, and automating them. So you basically would use Strange Loop to basically apply these optimizations to your pages. So at the time, web performance was very much a developer and engineer's kind of wheelhouse. And it didn't really exist outside that particular audience. And Josh Bixby, who is one of the co-founders of Strangeloop, he really felt like there was a better story to tell around connecting web performance to end user experience to business metrics and things like that. So really, Josh was kind of the pioneer in that area of thinking, and was very visionary. And he wanted somebody who had a background in user experience, who was interested in front end, um, but who could kind of tell that user experience story. So we met through kind of somebody that we mutually knew, really hit it off, and I started working with him. So he kind of was one of the people who really taught me a lot of what I know now in the early stages. And then also at the time, Human Beheshti, who is now at Fastly, as I believe he's the VP of engineering or the VP of product. Sorry, I should know. Sorry, Human. Anyways, and Human was also another person who I leaned on a lot to learn a lot about. And so the very first thing that Josh had me do was write about performance in a way that was meaningful to me. And so I had just come fresh off of doing using I'm not gonna name and shame, but basically a retail site that I really liked using because they were a Canadian company and they're a pretty major Canadian company, but they were so slow and it was so frustrating. You have to keep in mind this was like 2009. And so I just wrote about that. And Josh was like, "Okay, yes, you get what the issue is. You can write about this in a way that's like, kind of impassioned." And so he brought me on to do that. So that was a really long answer. I haven't actually
No,
thought
it's
about this
totally
in like
fine.
a long time. So it's just funny to kind of go back and recall all of that. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic, and this is exactly what it is. Like last week, I'd asked, Cliff and Philip, who again, sort of like long-standing, performance, people, and they went into these details of, almost like yesteryear in terms of like the technology that was around at the time and things like that. So no, that's awesome, and because everyone's got their own different path, right? And especially someone like yourself with the experience that you have and bring, you know these are completely different times than from back then. So you're over at Strange Loop, and you're basically writing about performance, and then is this what basically you did for the next few years? Were you actually practicing like UX in any way, shape, or form?
No, I wasn't. So the thing about Strangely that was really interesting, was that we were doing RUM before RUM even existed. So RUM standing for real user monitoring.
Mhm.
And we didn't call it that, but we were actually capturing real user data because we needed to capture user data so that we needed to know what pages people were coming in on so that we could optimize those pages. We needed to understand their path through the site so that we could actually start doing some intelligent learning about like anticipating, okay, well, actually doing preloading. Like we were doing preloading, intelligent preloading, um, really, really, really early on. So my focus on UX was there, but not in the same way it had been previously. Like I wasn't studying users in a lab or anything like that. It was actually looking at larger data sets for like the first time ever. So it's kind of mind blowing to go from, doing usability testing where you're looking at like 15, 20 people maybe coming in, you put them through your paces or their paces. And then to go from that to, okay, now we're going to look at a million user experiences, like a million beacons worth of data and do that. So it was just really kind of thinking about it on a larger scale and trying to keep in mind, like, I did this talk at Velocity. I did a keynote several years ago about, performance. Well, usability is ultimately an exercise in empathy. So you're trying to basically develop usability testing processes and then follow up that basically are like, how well can you empathize with your users? And then when you have larger data sets, it's like, okay, well, how do you scale empathy? And does empathy even scale? So in a bigger picture way, the work that I've done has always been about trying to figure out how to scale empathy, how to get people in various organizations. So whether it was at Strangeloop when I was doing front end optimization, or at SpeedCurve now, where we do monitoring and recommendations. So basically, like still making the recommendations for optimization, but ultimately our users have to do the optimization work themselves internally. And they also have to learn how to champion their work internally and how to get support for their work internally so that people throughout the organization see the value of performance like that as a challenge and as a problem has never gone away. I think that for people who know about the importance of making pages fast and making them responsive, making them not janky, um, if you know, you know, but it's a constant it's a constant reminder when I talk to customers and even big customers that they are always up against the challenge of making other people in their organization care about performance. So giving them the tools to communicate about performance in ways that resonate with people who might not be developers, who might not be engineers, they might be in marketing, they might be in sales, they might be in, conversion rate optimization, they might be executives, that kind of thing. So I think I kind of got off course from your question. I think I got way off course. So you can feel free to bring me back in.
No, no, totally. Like I said, I want to let you sort of like, bring up these ideas as they come along. Because again, like as you had mentioned earlier, some of these memories start to trigger other parts, that also were valuable in your trajectory, you know, and sometimes you forget these things in terms of just like, oh man, so and so who's over at, I don't know, Fastly right now, blah 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 blah. Last week, Cliff had mentioned this a couple of times. I think, Buddy Brewer's name came up a few times, and he literally talked about how Buddy Brewer sort of like set him up here and there, and then Philip at one point talked about how Cliff sort of helped set him up,
Mhm.
in particular areas, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but the one thing I want to do is as we sort of come back to your story, I know you'd been writing along the way, you know. Actually, let me just speaking of pulling back, I did want to ask you a quick question. You're saying that you at some point were collecting real user data, but it wasn't called rum at the time. Do you remember what you did call it internally?
We didn't really I don't know that we gave it a specific label. It was just data in our system. Like the tool itself
Mm.
was an FEO tool, so front end optimization. So
Mm.
you don't hear about FEO anymore because it's been sort of absorbed by other tools and it's sort of built into some other tools. Like CDNs might do some FEO, that kind of thing. But so we didn't call it rum. We just I think like kind of near the end of my time at Strangeloop before it got acquired, we were starting to kind of like say like, oh, actually, like these rum tools that are starting to emerge over here, this is actually what we've been doing all along, but we didn't really kind of try to monetize it as rum.
I got it. So, as I get back to what I just mentioned, so your writing that I came across was when, and I do believe this is when I saw it, but when you worked at Sosta. And am I mistaken by saying this?
Maybe. This is going back to what I said before about the fact that, one of the byproducts of getting older and working in an industry for a long time is like my sense of what happened when is pretty vague. But so Strange Loop got acquired by a company called Radware. So I spent some time working at Radware,
Maybe you
and
should ask her.
I was very lucky to get to do some really interesting research or like and direct some research projects where we outsource it to third parties. And I was really kind of more the person who is creating the questions and helping develop the framework, but then the third parties did it, where we did the neuroscientific research. So I think that might be what you're talking about. And
I
then
think it was Radware now, because that
yeah.
does ring a bell.
So I did a lot. I think one of the studies that I did that was really interesting to me at the time, and I still allude to it when I talk about the kind of neurological or psychological value of performance, was a study that we commissioned where this is in the early days of mobile,
Mhm.
where we wanted to actually replicate another study that had been done a few years previously by CA Technologies, where they actually had a company do did like neuro marketing research, put like electrodes on people's heads, these headsets to do EEG kind of data gathering, and that was to measure the impact of delays for people who were trying to complete tasks on desktop computers. And so they basically did the kind of multivariate study where the users didn't know that they were being, kind of given different speeds of the same site. And they kind of put people through their paces to complete tasks. And then they kind of measured and interestingly found that for the users, the cohorts of users who experienced delays, they had, visible spikes in their charts that indicated frustration or impatience or whatever, but various forms of stress. And so they coined the term web stress, which I think is a really, really great term. So fast forward a few years later, the study was like kind of just hooked in my brain. And it was early days of mobile. And in the early days of mobile, what people might not know is that there was a lot of just, well, yeah, things are slow on mobile because they were, but users will just get used to it. They'll manage their expectations and they'll be fine because what choice do they have? And which I think is a kind of a terrible attitude to have about anything. Like people will get used to it because what choice do they have? It's like,
Yeah.
if that's your go-to, that's a bad go-to. It's like, just don't do it. But that was the logic with mobile users. And so the hypothesis was that actually, sure, maybe people would just deal with it because they have to, but from a neurological perspective, what's actually going on for them? So we basically contracted the same neuromarketing company that did the research for CA, and they did a project for us with a much more elegant, because the technology had advanced, a much more elegant headset. And we did the same thing. Except it was with mobile users. So we asked people to go through some tasks with retail sites and on some travel booking sites to see what happened. And for some cohorts, we slowed things down. For some cohorts, we slowed things down even more. And then we had kind of a baseline, kind of optimal experience. And we compared the charts, the EEG readouts for the different users at different points in the tasks that they were asked to complete. And what we found was very satisfying. It was that actually it was the same as for the desktop users. Frustration would spike, stress would spike for the people experiencing delays, and those spikes would become even more pronounced when they were at critical moments like putting an item in their checking cart or trying to check out. So it was really gratifying because it just made the case that, yes, there's what people can get used to. And, maybe then if you're looking at how people are using your site or the fact that they're staying on your site to complete a task anyways, that's only part of the picture. Do you want your users to just complete the task, or do you want them to also be happy? Because a happy user is more likely to return to your site or say good things about your site to their friends and that sort of thing. If they've just completed a task and kind of that's it, that's really only a little part of what you think of as being the full kind of retail user journey. The retail user journey happens outside of their interaction with your site as well. So yeah, so it was a really, really interesting study. I was really grateful for the opportunity to get a chance to do that.
That's amazing. And, either the connection of, sentiments and, whether it be absolute delight and frustration with, the internet and now especially, or the web and, now the way we, consume it mostly on mobile devices is super duper interesting.
Mhm.
And again, I remember my moments when I kind of came across that sort of, or had that aha moment. And obviously reading some documentation and being like, oh, yeah, this is probably true. A quick story, and because it's not about me, but I remember I went to see a longtime friend, and we were sitting there. We hadn't caught up in a while, so we're just talking about X, Y, and Z. And he'd asked me, where I worked, what I did. I was like, try to explain the web performance space, and blah 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 blah. And I gave him enough information that one moment he just jumped out. He's like, "Oh, I hate that because whenever I want to buy this thing and blah blah blah, and it doesn't work or it's too slow." And I was like, "Oh my God, I should be recording this." This is all I was thinking in my head. I'm like, and he was just going on and on and on about his issues, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is real." Like people are frustrated with experiences that are not at least delightful, as some may have said in the past. Obviously, this was a lasting moment for you, and you really carried the torch in really connecting the dots between what we know as user experience, that very much sort of like intangible thing that we absolutely need, and performance. And you've kind of like furthered your study and you're getting like deeper into it right now. I know we talked about you want to sort of like show some material that you may have sort of been reading and or published or want to share just generally.
Yeah. So speaking of connecting the dots, for anybody who isn't super familiar with the whole, web performance ecosystem, who knows who, that kind of thing. So you mentioned Cliff a couple of times. I actually work really closely with Cliff at SpeedCurve, and Cliff and I work together at SOSTA, and I've known Cliff
Probably it.
before that. So we go way, way, way back. But a thing that people don't might not know about Cliff is that he worked for Walmart Labs in the very, very early days. And Walmart Labs was one of the early retailers that were big users of rum, and that's all on Cliff. So he brought rum kind of into the retail space and kind of like launched it out in the world in a very big way with charts that like I remember when I first saw them. This is again going back to when I was at Strange Loop. So this is like 15, 16 years ago, seeing these charts, and they didn't have a name at the time. We now call them correlation charts. And other people I know call them Crocker charts because Cliff was the one who actually created them. But when
Wow.
I saw them, and I'll actually pull one up so that it's not just me kind of waving my hands in the air. So this is a correlation chart, aka a Crocker chart, and coincidentally, it's actually in a blog post that that you can see up here, byline by Cliff Crocker, recently written about something called long animation frames, which we won't go into right now, but there's a variety of new long animation frame metrics. So we were kind of putting them through their paces. And one of the ways that we like at Speaker, we like to put a new metric through its paces is to see how well does this page speed or page experience metric correlate to changes in user behavior. So in another way of asking it is, if we make this metric faster or slower, improve it, it gets worse. Um, does bounce rate improve? Does conversion rate improve? Does cart size improve? Does revenue improve? There's all kinds of different user experience and business metrics that you can correlate to your performance metrics. And so this is kind of just a breakdown of how what a correlation chart looks like. You can see these orange bars or yellow bars, depending on how the color is turned on your monitor, that are the different cohorts of users based on the histogram is kind of showing the variance across across the whatever the metric might be. Usually they're time-based metrics. And then the blue line is the user behavior or the business metric. So it could be bounce rate or conversion rate. And this is a very beautiful and elegant correlation chart because it shows very cleanly how conversions are highest for the cohorts of users that are on the fast end of the spectrum, and conversion rate declines quite steeply as more and more people are getting like slower experiences as the metric degrades. So this is a correlation chart. So they've been around, as I said, for a long time. Cliff pioneered them. They're amazing for making a business case for performance and for kind of galvanizing an organization to care about performance. So we always encourage our customers to find the conversion of convergence of metrics, the user experience metrics, and the behavior and business metrics that give them the most powerful correlation chart, and then use this as kind of the leading chart to kind of share with the business. So correlation charts are fantastic because they let you answer the question of how fast is fast enough for your users. So in relation to correlation charts, there's something we call the performance plateau. And this is something that I've been writing about for a long time, and really kind of hope that this term and this thinking kind of takes off, because one of the questions that we would field from customers, and this even predates being at SpeedCurve, is people just sort of saying like, look, my pages used to take like 8 seconds for, like meaningful content to start to render. And we shaved 3 seconds off of that. So now it's 5 seconds. And it was a lot of work to get from 8 seconds to 5 seconds, but nothing changed. Like our bounce rate stayed the same, conversion rate stayed the same. And that's very demoralizing. It's very frustrating. And kind of more to the point, it's really hard to get your business to keep investing in making your pages faster and investing in your team and your tools if you can't prove that you actually move the needle on something that matters to the business. So what correlation charts let us do is identify, well, actually, there's this plateau that happens on most correlation charts where, in this one, for example, I don't know how well you can see the tiny little numbers at the bottom, but at 2.8 seconds for this particular data set, and it varies from site to site. So
Yep.
there's a huge caveat that I tell people, like, don't take anybody else's correlation chart and what's fast for them to indicate what could be fast for your own site. You really do need to look at your own data always. But for this particular site, the performance plateau starts at 2.8 seconds. And 2.8 seconds is pretty fast. But if you are really wanting to make things even to improve your business, you're going to have to make things even faster than that. So for this particular site, peak conversions happen at about 1.1 second. So just understanding that 2.8 seconds might be faster for some other sites, and it might even be kind of like, well, industry standard is 2.5 seconds is fast enough. For example, for your audience that knows about Core Web Vitals, or even for those who don't, Core Web Vitals is a set of Google metrics that are really helpful, and they're meant to kind of get people to care about performance and simplify how you think about performance. So it's just a set of 3 metrics. One of the metrics is a metric called largest contentful paint, which is what this chart is about. And so largest contentful paint is when the largest visual element in the browser viewport, kind of above the fold. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but in the viewport above the fold, renders, and it's one of the Google metrics, and the Google recommended threshold for good for LCP is under 2.5 seconds. Well, in this particular case, you can see that 2.5 seconds isn't really going to get you that much more improvement in terms of conversions. You really have to get a lot faster than that. So this isn't to be negative about Core Web Vitals or about the recommended thresholds. Their recommendations are based on huge aggregated data sets across lots and lots and lots of sites. You really do, as I said before, need to look at your own data and see 2.5 seconds isn't good enough for me. It really needs to be like ideally 1.1 second or as close to that as you can manage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, you make a great point, which is this is, core vitals, LCP, whatever whichever one you want to use, is kind of like a large, over a large amount of, millions and millions of sites. And they're like, okay, this is what we recommend, but everyone's got their own, I don't know, body mass index, right? So, What is amazing for and fine for you may not be for someone else,
Exactly.
and things like that. So, folks, a reminder, rum data, synthetic data coexist, but you definitely need to get a full, spectrum, a good look at what your users are experiencing so that you can make these decisions. Like you said, 2.8 is kind of like, oh, okay, that's not too bad. But if your data says like, dude, at 2.8, it's too late for your site, you got to go down and double down and say, okay, we have to make sure that we're fast at all times.
Exactly. Yeah, synthetic data just can't it's not able to give you these insights. It gives you lots of other insights about your pages, but if you were just doing synthetic testing, you would see what your synthetic test tells you your LCP time is. And if all you had was that output and you knew that Google's recommended threshold is 2.5 seconds and your synthetic test says, yeah, 2.5 seconds, you're fine. You're missing out on insights like, well, maybe it's not fine for you in terms of actual outcomes. So, yeah.
Wow. Um, and and not to sort of steer away from the topic here, which is sort of like how fast is fast. These are some of these discussions that you're having now. These are some of the points that you made in your book as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, I wrote a book, and that was right around the time that I did join SOSTA and got to officially start working with Cliff, which was awesome. And the book is so the folks at O'Reilly approached me because I had done, a lot of talks, presenting research about different topics that were around the intersection of performance in business or performance and user experience. And so they asked if I'd be interested in doing a book about the intersection of performance in business, and it's called Time is Money. And what I am grateful for with this book is that it's like a lot of tech books can get out of date because they're about kind of like the technologies of the moment. Things can shift, things can change. But I really tried to make this book to be more of an evergreen resource so that it collates a lot of research like that I had done, but also that other people had done, other companies had done that was just kind of like, okay, well, what's the psychological angle? What's the neuroscientific angle? Okay, that's interesting. What are the various business angles and the business cases, and what have other companies done? And then, and what have companies done to kind of improve things for themselves? So, yeah, I drew heavily on my own research, other people's research. There's a really great website that Tim Cadlick, who is somebody that your audience might already be familiar with. Tim is amazing. He and I are co-chairs along with Harry Roberts of the performance.now conference. It happens every fall in Amsterdam. And Tim created this website called WPO stats.com. WPO standing for Web Performance Optimization, WPO stats.com. And it is a repository for case studies that demonstrate how various companies made their site faster and had some kind of business or user experience boost. So it's really well organized by industry, by metrics, things like that. So if folks are interested in kind of getting more case studies and seeing what other companies have done, and again, I'll I'll just keep saying this until my face turns red. Like, this is other companies' data; it's not your data. So what they've done is great for them, but hopefully it kind of inspires people to think like, oh, okay, well, what are the various ways that I can actually, um, you know, make things faster for my site, for my company, and kind of link this back to a business metric. So I use case studies from there in my book as well. So there's a lot of information.
No, absolutely. And again, getting back to the idea that, you know, 2.5 seconds on site A, which is great, may not be good for site B. It all depends on, a myriad of conditions that are taking place that you just simply don't know about. And that's why, rum's important. That's why, folks, last week's episode, which will be ready tomorrow, by the way, with the rum CG group, that was an important conversation. Let's talk about very quickly then, since you brought it up. You are co-chair at perf.now conference. Did you want to sort of talk about that very quickly?
Yeah, it's I think it's the only English language performance conference in the world at this point. It takes place in Amsterdam this year. It's going to be on October 30th to 31st. Every year, the speaker lineup is um, pretty great if I do. I mean, I can't take credit for it because these people are amazing and they're out there. They're the ones actually doing the work. And I'm just like the lucky person who gets to sit on a Zoom call with, Harry and Tim and PPK, who's the organizer, who's based in Amsterdam. And we get the thrill of kind of thinking, oh, who would be great to have on the stage this year? So we've announced some of our speakers for this year and some of the people that you've had on the podcast, like Vinicius, is going to be doing a talk, and you're always there. So it's always delightful to see you there doing your hallway track. Um, so yeah, it's a single track conference. It's a great opportunity just for folks to, it sounds like I'm doing an infomercial.
It's all
to,
right.
to hear from industry leaders, like Google always has a strong presence there, and Microsoft and a lot of other organizations, and to hear from industry leaders in performance about kind of like what are the newest tools, what are best practices. We try to keep it really accessible so that if you're new to performance, we try to kind of like set the stage so that people can get really good takeaways to kind of take home and put into practice in their own organizations and kind of get excited about performance. 'Cause I think that's half the battle is just, you know, realizing that sometimes you can be a team of one in your organization. You're the performance person and you've got to get other people in your organization to care. And it's really important to have events like Perf Now, podcasts like yours, and the various blogs that are out there, and tap into that community to kind of to keep yourself motivated and excited. Like for me, it's I look forward to it so much every year. I love talking to people because it's a single track conference. You get to actually talk with the speakers, like people. There's no like green room where the speakers are all hanging out like celebrities. Like everybody's just mingling during the breaks together. So it's just a really very warm and friendly, very fun event. So if folks can go, I wish you would, and come up and say hi to me. And you'll definitely want to say hi to Henri.
I'll be around, but yeah, it is fun. As I mentioned, I think I spoke to Cliff about this, and maybe you as well. It does feel like a bit of a pilgrimage, where people come in and sort of catch up again, and some, make discoveries. As we sort of like wrap things up, I wanted to say, what do you have, or what is in sort of like the future path for yourself right now?
The thing that I've been focusing on and getting the world, getting tech folks and outside of tech folks to care about performance is a little bit like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. It's just never ending work. And it's really easy if you've been in this space for a long time to make a lot of assumptions. So I'm trying to bypass that and really trying to look at performance with fresh eyes, which is really hard to do. So and trying to think about it, like if I was brand new to this space, what are the things that I would notice? What are the things I would ask about? Because the tools and the data can tell us so much more than they could tell us when I first got involved in this space.
Mhm.
It's almost like I'm in a phase of kind of reinvestigation and realizing that folks need to, even more than ever, because the economy being what it is, the world being what it is, budgets are tight. People really need the tools to rationalize the work that they do and why it matters. And so I'm really kind of leaning into helping folks understand, measure, and easily demonstrate to people the ROI of the work that they do. So the ROI of web performance is kind of like my focus for the foreseeable future, and just finding ways to make that data and those insights really, really accessible to people.
Absolutely. Couple of things there, as you mentioned that, the data, the tools are much more abundant now. And, there are days where I think whether or not that's to our advantage or detriment, because suddenly you have so much more data. You're like, I don't know what to do with this,
Yeah.
and so it does take a lot of like, okay, how do I make sure I have this conversation that you can understand as to why some of this information is absolutely crucial and how to sort of interpret it, read it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's almost like everything's coming back to your book now. As you said, the book is kind of like evergreen, and it's just, the content is the same, like the ROI for performance and how to, make sure that it's top of mind literally at all times, because it's super important, especially as we get into these seasons like back to school, which
Mhm.
is, a big season for a lot of retailers, especially these days where, margins are tight and tariffs are big, whatever happens there, who knows? It's like a dice roll. Tammy, thank you very much for your time. I had to go back and it was Radware. I was like, I don't know why I kept saying Sosta, but I think it was probably because, Phil had brought it up. Not Phil. Well, maybe Philip did bring it up, but definitely Cliff brought it up. And I was like, I kept thinking Sosta, 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 because I could
Oh
see it
yeah. Well, I
over
mean,
my head.
I worked with Philip at Sosta as well. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a weirdly small world.
In closing, if someone has been fascinated with today's conversation and wants to sort of like follow you, where can you be reached?
Yeah, I'm mostly online at Blue Sky. So just at tammyeverts.com on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. It's it's hopping on LinkedIn. Who knew? So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So yeah.
I'm sorry. It's funny you should say that because uh, I remember when I was asked, not so forcibly, but asked to join LinkedIn. I was like, why? It's like it's a bunch of cotton dockers over there. And but recently I'm like, okay, this is actually feeling a little bit more like, hey, there's some ripped jeans here, some denim jackets, V-necks, you know.
I feel like LinkedIn, LinkedIn, we all like everybody likes to kind of like make their digs at LinkedIn, myself included. But like actually going back to the early days of performance for me, like how I actually got the introduction to Josh Bixby at Strange Loop was I had been doing a lot of contract work like after my second child was born. And I was like, I just want to get a day job. I didn't like contract work was taking over my life and I didn't really want to be that busy. And a day job would have been like more relaxing and it was. But I created a LinkedIn profile. I was like, I guess I should make a LinkedIn profile, and I did. And literally, our mutual friend, our mutual contact, got in touch with me the next day through LinkedIn. So I when I remember, I like to tell people that story. It's like, LinkedIn is like because there's no politics, there's no like nobody like I'm not like if I scroll through my LinkedIn feed, I'm not seeing a lot of ads for junk that people are trying to sell me. Like
Yeah.
I feel like it's very much opted in content at LinkedIn. And I more and more over the years really, really appreciate that. So yeah, like two thumbs up LinkedIn. You guys are doing a good job.
Hey, listen, I'm actually trying to spend a bit more time there, and I've been appreciating the environment, and I still haven't just tweaked it right. I simply just created a profile. I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll just be out there, but I think I'm not using it to its best capabilities. That being said, Tammy, thank you very much for your time today. That was super duper insightful. I mean, I'm looking forward to kind of seeing some more of your work. The sort of like psychological sort of like impact of using the internet and everything that's involved there, because I absolutely do believe that there's well, it's been proven, but it's fun to sort of like connecting those dots and tying user behavior to like a good, pleasurable, delightful site to use, because I know I hate crappy sites. But no, thank you very much for your time. And what I'm going to do, any parting last words?
Oh, no.
No problem, no problem.
I'm I'm not good at, like, last minute, like, pithy insights or anything like that, but thank you. This has been really, really fun.
Oh, no, no, I'm having a great time having these conversations. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to take you off stage, but please stand by because I do want to kind of close off with you personally.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take you off stage right there. And folks, thank you very much for joining.